Artists have sketch pads, filmmakers use storyboards, Da Vinci had a notebook full of ideas. And today, almost everybody's working with AI, but hardly anyone has a system to organize our thinking outside of that chat. And that's where the buddy document comes in. AI has changed how we think, but not how we capture our thoughts. We collaborate with machines all day long, but we still haven't yet built a space to hold those ideas. In this video, you'll learn how to build a buddy document, which is the written counterpart to your AI chats that live side by side in a separate window from your conversation. I'll show you how to set one up, what goes inside each tab, and how to templatize it so that you can reuse it again and again on future projects. I found that the best setup is a dual space layout. If you've got two monitors, that's great, but you can easily do this on one laptop. The goal is you want to create a clear split between two different mental spaces. We've talked about this before. There's a difference between thinking and doing when it comes to AI. So the AI chat is your thinking space. That's where your ideas are explored and tested. The buddy document, though, is your doing space. That's where those ideas take shape and become final deliverables. AI has changed the way that we work, but our workflows haven't adapted to keep all those ideas straight. It's never going to stop generating, and yet we are still missing a framework to help us think alongside it. So what happens is we end up A, drowning in too many ideas, B, we lose our best ones because they're buried way up there deep in the chat, or C, we forget that no matter how good the output is, it is not final until you put your human spin on it. For a while there, we all fell for that story because AI companies were selling this fantasy that we could finish all our work in half the time with just like one click. But that narrative is falling apart because people can now spot AI generated content. Some people are calling that work slop. The truth is we still have to think and we still have to write. That is what makes us human. Except now we have this tool right beside us. It's a tool that can push our creativity to something higher. It's a tool beside us that can help us polish our work to a much higher quality. And that word side is kind of the whole idea behind the buddy document because it literally sits beside your chat window, giving you a space to manage and shape the work yourself. Let's talk about what a buddy document actually is. It's the workspace that lives alongside your AI chats. Today we're going to build one and I'm going to do it in Google Docs, but you could easily do this in something like Notion, Coda, Word, or even OneNote. The point is that you have one central spot where everything lives. So this is where you do your writing, you store all your supporting materials for the project, and we're going to look at those pieces in a moment. So whether you're doing a major presentation, you're running a campaign for marketing, building a product, even vibe coding an app, this becomes your project's hub. Because when you're working on something across many different days or weeks, you're jumping between ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, that buddy document is what keeps everything in order. All right, so let's jump in and I'll show you how to set this up. First, I like to give mine a cover page so you can drop an image about your project or maybe your client's logo. And right on that cover page is where I add links to all of the different chat threads that I'm using in this project. If you're anything like me, you may do some of your project in Claude and Gemini and Perplexity and ChatGPT. You may be using multiple different projects, multiple different threads. And at least as of the time I'm recording this video, those models don't do a great job of allowing you to search through your old chats. So I like to keep a log here of all of the different chats that I'm using in a links section. Now, you can also, depending on the project that you're working on, if you have other links to websites or research, you can put all of your links here on the cover page. Moving on to the next tab is your project brief. So you and the AI need to have a shared intent behind what it is that you're trying to make. So I want you to think about this as like setting the bones of your project and doing that early on so that you don't have to keep repeating this every single prompt that you write. When I'm writing something, for example, I like to include what I call a message architecture. So what is my main takeaway? If that is the umbrella topic, then what are the key beats or what are the key details that support my main idea? And I also like to include a through line, which is the thread that ties everything together. Of course, your conclusion would go here as well. You could even jot down a few working titles or headlines. And by the way, we have a different video about how to use a message architecture in your writing. But basically, this is meant to be brief, and it is the North Star of your piece. It's the thing that even when you drift way off topic, this is going to remind the model what it is working on. If you're not working on a piece of writing, what you would put in this section would be just describing your project. What are the goals? What is the audience or the timeline? But either way, you want to keep this part short and structured. Now let's go off on a quick aside about structured data. Notice that mine is in Markdown, and I want to tell you why. We know from the research that models perform noticeably better when your input is clearly structured. They are surprisingly sensitive to how that information is packaged. So whether you're using Markdown or XML or JSON, you're giving the model something more digestible, something easy for it to parse and follow. And if you don't feel like formatting it yourself, you can just paste your text inside of a chat and ask the model, hey, convert this into Markdown or XML, and it'll do it for you. Okay. Now, once I've got my project brief, I can work across lots of different chats, even different models. I can work over multiple days, and my work never drifts off course. And here's why. Anytime I start a new chat, I just go and download this one tab. By the way, anytime you save something from a Google Doc that has multiple tabs, it's only going to save that one tab, and that's a good thing here. So File, Download, and Plain Text. Okay. Now I did that as plain text because my project brief is in Markdown. Then I can go to a brand new chat, upload it again, and whatever I happen to be doing, I just add to my prompt, keep your work in line with the attached project brief, because that project brief contains everything that it needs to know about my project. The next section is your contexts and references. This section holds all of the background materials, the information that the AI needs to understand your situation. Remember context documents. They are your reference materials. They support your work, but they don't appear in the final output or in the prompt itself. So this is where I would drop in the artifacts that I want to show the model that it can draw from. It could be things like call transcripts, meeting notes, pasted emails, research. You can upload manuals, data sets, documents about your organization, any sort of guidelines about your product, brand style guides. This could be even a swipe file with examples of what a good output would look like. You could also keep track of the people who are involved in your project, the who's who, and how are they related to the project. Is this something between you and a client? Is it meant for a certain audience? You could even just do a short roster of everybody who's on your team, name, role, and what that person cares about. Organize this however you want, but you can use the tabs and the sub-tabs to paste that information directly in here. And also, if you happen to have these documents stored in folders, you could always link shortcuts to these folders. The next section, of course, is the main thing that you're putting in your buddy document, which is your drafts. This is the actual writing. You might have one tab for your outline, another for your first draft, your second, and so on, all the way to your final version. Or if your process is a little bit simpler, some people like to just keep one tab and then keep editing the same document as you go. There really is no right or wrong way. It depends on how you like to work. But that being said, I do think it's worth keeping some of your older drafts, especially if you're working with multiple models. For example, Grok tends to be a little bit more conversational, Claude tends to be a little bit more creative, ChatGPT more technical. So it helps you to see how your ideas are evolving over time. And if something ends up drifting too far, you can always go back and bring back a piece that you really loved. One of the best parts about the Buddy Doc is that unlike a chat, you can actually use formatting. You can highlight and change colors and make text bold. I like to use inline delimiters. So what that means is these could be like brackets or curly braces to leave notes for yourself and to the model. So for example, brackets could be for notes to self. These are separate from the output. So you might write something like, I need a better transition here, or this paragraph feels too long. Curly braces are the final drafts that you don't want changed. So, for example, sometimes there's a line or a phrase or a word that you really like and you don't want the model to mess with it. So you can wrap it in curly brackets and write something like, don't change the parts in the curly brackets. Those delimiters are going to signal which parts are for you, which parts are for the LLM, and then what is final. Next is what I call parking lots. So, writers think faster than they type sometimes. And whenever you're in the flow, especially when you're working alongside AI, the ideas are coming fast and you don't want to lose them, but also you don't want to break your focus on what you were writing. So that's what the parking lot is for. Think about this like a holding zone for your ideas that you will return to later. Now, here's how I use my parking lot. First, what I call good snippets. So as I'm going through the chat, every time that I see a word, it could be a keyword or a phrase or just a really good idea, something that makes me go, wow, that is awesome, and I want to make sure that that makes it into my final piece, I'll copy it and just paste it in this tab. So this is like the best of the best. These are the golden nuggets, and I like to give them their own section. Another thing you can do in your parking lot is questions for later, things that you want to revisit. Sometimes, again, we get distracted because we go off and we want to research something or we want to go fact check something, and then we break our focus. And so if you think of a question, you could just park a list of them that you can revisit later. You can also park in your parking lot the actual to-do list for the project, especially if it's a project that's taking multiple days or even weeks. Maybe also you have other people on your team that you're collaborating with. You could store the to-do list and even use Google's tags to show who is responsible for what piece, just so that you can keep everybody in check. And then lastly, I have a section called content for later. This is like a graveyard. So what I mean by graveyard is a lot of times when you're cutting and you're editing your final draft, you may delete something and it was a really good idea. It just didn't fit in your project anymore. So you cut it, but instead of me deleting it altogether, if it's still good and it's something that I may want to repurpose into another piece of content later, I'll paste it here, and it's kind of like in my graveyard, I call it, as content for later. And finally, prompts. So when it comes to prompts, here's what I have learned. You're going to use a lot of them, and none of them are perfect. What works beautifully in Claude might not in ChatGPT. Sometimes a long, detailed prompt is going to hit the mark, and other times you're going to need something that's shorter and more direct. The key is to document and test and iterate right here inside of your buddy doc. So as I'm in here writing my draft, I'm also pasting the exact prompts that I'm using as I go, maybe making a note about how it went. I can use little visual cues like a green emoji for the prompts that worked really well, or a drop down to note which AI model I used. If the prompt did just okay, but maybe it needs some work, I could tag it with yellow. I could tag it with red if it totally failed. I also like to name each prompt and what it does. And if you look closely here, you'll see a version number next to the title. So this one says V3, which means that I've refined that prompt 3 different times. But then as I scroll, you can actually see the earlier versions and how the prompt evolved. And I know that may feel like extra work, but this section actually saves you time later because you're going to start to notice what techniques are reusable. And so instead of starting from scratch next time you do a similar project, you can just reach for whatever has been proven to work. As I've said before, I am a big fan of doing my prompts in markdown, which means that they can be a little bit strange looking to read at a glance. So I also like to put the prompt itself just inside of a 1-cell table with its own style preset. So I just throw a table in there, it's 1 cell, and anything inside of that table that's in this Courier font, I know that is an actual prompt. And then what's outside of the tables could be my notes to self. This really comes in handy whenever, let's say you're doing a prompt stack. So maybe I'm doing a presentation and that would be a whole stack of different prompts, because think about it. For a presentation, each prompt is doing a different job. One might be to brainstorm ideas for your headlines. Another would be to handle the text that goes on your slides. Another prompt would write your talk track, and one would help to generate visuals or images. And then at the end, maybe you have a prompt that fact checks. And so by keeping the prompts inside of their own boxes, I can actually add notes in between the boxes so that if I'm delegating this to somebody else or just notes to self, I can understand what each one of those prompts is here to do. Now, once you have set up a shell of how you want to organize your buddy doc, then let me show you how you can create a template of it so that every time you click on it, you get a new fresh version.
So you go up to your address bar where the link to your Google Doc is, and you want to look for the word edit. Put your cursor before edit and highlight everything after it. Backspace to get rid of all that. And then instead, you just type the word copy. So now this whole URL is my template. So I'll copy that link, and I work on a lot of writing projects, so I need a fresh buddy document and I need it handy almost every day. So I just keep mine right here as a shortcut on my browser homepage. Of course, you could put yours wherever it's fastest for you to access. And when you click it, rather than it taking you to an old one that's already filled out, it forces you to make a copy of your template. So now you essentially have created a fresh buddy doc that you can open each time you start a new project.
So here's the takeaway message. To think clearly with AI, you need a second workspace that's yours. You need a place where your ideas can take shape beside what the machine is doing, and the buddy document becomes your essential companion to those AI conversations. This is going to give you a tangible space where you can organize all of your ideas, where those raw thoughts from AI are now going to become polished and they're going to become your own.